She entered, too late for protocol, but just in time to change a destiny. The wedding hall looked like something out of a fairy tale. Rows of perfectly aligned chairs, chandeliers twinkling like low-hanging stars, and at the end, a floral arch, framing the altar like a portal to someone else's happily ever after. Lucas Carter, heir to one of the largest hotel chains in the country, was there out of obligation. A long-time friend of the groom, his role as best man felt more like a formality than a joy. The flawless elegance of his tailored suit clashed with the bored expression on his face. He was handsome, rich, desired, and hollow. His soul carried more silence than celebration. He gazed vaguely toward the altar, not really seeing anything. He'd already shaken too many hands, endured too many fake greetings, smiled for politeness one too many times. This ceremony, like so many others, felt like just another scene in the social theater he'd grown tired of, until the door at the back of the hall opened. There was a slight delay in the procession. And then she appeared. Grace Miller walked in hurriedly, her heart racing, eyes darting around as she tried to avoid attention. Her red wavy hair fell softly over her shoulders, and her lilac dress shimmered as it moved, stirred by her cautious, rushed steps. She was the missing maid of honor, but to Lucas, at that moment, she was everything that had been missing from his world. He turned his head. His eyes, used to luxury and manufactured beauty, weren't drawn to perfection, but to the sincere lightness she carried. She had no idea she was being watched. She wasn't posing. And maybe that's why she was so captivating. Grace sat discreetly in the row reserved for bridesmaids. She was still catching her breath after running from the parking lot. She'd missed the group bus, taken care of her sick mother that morning, and even stitched a loose detail on the bride's dress before leaving. That was her life, stumbles, giving simplicity, and yet she didn't seem burdened by any of it. Lucas kept watching her, as if time had folded around that late arrival. He didn't know her name, but something about her made him feel awake, as if that silent moment meant more than all the parties he'd ever attended. The wedding went on. The couple exchanged emotional vows, and the audience sighed in sync. But Lucas would remember none of the words spoken at that altar. His attention was locked on the maid of honor sitting at the far end of the row. Grace, even seated, held a composed, almost invisible posture. But there was something in her presence that stood out, a kind of subtle grace that couldn't be taught at any etiquette school. She was the woman who arrived late, with a slightly wrinkled dress and eyes still marked by exhaustion. And yet, she radiated without trying. Lucas saw her laugh quietly during the groom's vows. A small, timid, spontaneous laugh, but so authentic it warmed something inside him. When the ceremony ended, guests rose, and congratulations began. Lucas has always found himself surrounded by people who knew him only by reputation, investors, socialites, journalists disguised as friends. And he just smiled mechanically, scanning the room for the only person who didn't know who he was. Then he spotted her by the cake table, adjusting the flower decorations, alone. He walked across the room slowly, not knowing exactly what he would do once he got there. But his gaze fixed on her said more than any greeting could. Grace noticed him approaching and instinctively stepped aside to make room. "Is everything okay here?" she asked kindly, assuming he was part of the event staff. Lucas chuckled softly. "I should be the one asking that," he said with a faint smile. "You arrived out of breath, but no one seemed more at ease than you." She frowned, slightly confused. "You noticed?" she asked, now more shy. "Impossible not to," he replied, with a sincerity so rare it made her look away, blushing. It felt strange for Grace to talk to such a polished, centered man. She was used to rushed, indifferent people, but here he was standing there looking at her as if she were the only missing piece in a world that already had everything. "Sorry I was late. My morning was chaos. Sick mum, crowded bus, wrong. Shoo. And still you made the whole room pause for a second. I don't think that's something you can teach." Grace smiled, and in that smile Lucas felt the absence of everything that surrounded him. The flashes, the rehearsed speeches, the shallow toasts. It was like finding fresh water in a golden desert. They stood there, talking for minutes that felt eternal. About simple things, family, music, favorite coffee. Lucas was surprised at how naturally he spoke about himself. With her, there was nothing to prove. For the first time in a long while, he just was. And Grace, without even knowing it, started to see beyond the magnate suit. The man who looked at the world with weariness, but who saw her as a possible new beginning. The band's music began to fill the background, slowly setting the tone for the celebration. Couples smiled on the dance floor, glasses clinked in toast, and memories were captured in hurried photos. But in a quiet corner of the room, there was silence between two people who didn't know each other, and somehow already felt familiar. Lucas noticed the details, the way she held the edge of her dress to keep from tripping, how she bit the corner of her lip when thinking, and most of all, how she wasn't trying to impress. Grace noticed him, too, and something inside her knew he was different from the men who faked charm to hide their emptiness. Lucas was calm, nearly silent, but there was intensity in his eyes, as if he carried questions he hadn't dared ask in years. "Are you a friend of the groom?" she asked, curious. He hesitated for a second. "Yes, we grew up together. I'm Lucas." Her eyes widened slightly. "Lucas Carter?" He nodded with a simple smile. She tried to hide her surprise. Of course she knew who he was. Who didn't? The hotel magnate, the man who held the world in his hands, now standing in front of her, looking at her as if she were just a woman. "And you? Who's the maid of honor who arrived late and saved my night from boredom?" She laughed. Grace Miller. I'm a friend of the bride, and I think that's pretty much it." Lucas looked at her for a moment longer than necessary. "No, you're definitely not just pretty much it." Grace felt something she hadn't in a long time, seen, not for what she did, not for what she wore, but for who she was, the Aufruhr. Conversation flowed, gentle and captivating, until a wedding photographer approached them. "Can I get a shot of this beautiful couple?" They both chuckled, embarrassed. "We're not a couple," she replied quickly. But as they posed side by side, there was a moment when Lucas discreetly looked at her like he was glimpsing the future, and the camera's click captured more than an image. It captured a beginning. Outside the reception hall, the late afternoon sun painted the gardens in warm, golden light. The party continued inside, but Lucas and Grace were sitting on a stone bench beneath an old tree. The light breeze made the tool of her dress dance, as if the moment itself was breathing. "Do you go to a lot of weddings?" Grace asked playfully. "Only the ones my rich friends insist I attend," he answered with a dry laugh. Grace smiled, but she noticed the shadow behind that humor. Lucas had everything the world applauded: wealth, fame, freedom. But something in him still felt trapped, like someone surrounded by gold, yet with nowhere to rest his soul. "I like watching people at events like this," she said, turning, her face toward the glowing hall. "It's like everyone's playing a part, but sometimes you can spot the ones who are tired of pretending." He stared at her for a few seconds, as if she had just exposed him without even realizing it. "And what do you see when you look at me?" Grace hesitated. She didn't want to be invasive, but she also didn't want to lie. "Someone who's used to being where they don't want to be, and doesn't know how to leave anymore." Lucas didn't respond. He just looked out at the horizon, where the sky had already started to darken. But inside, that sentence had knocked something loose. She saw him, without filters, without interest, without fear. "Most people only come close because of my last name," he finally said. "But with you, it's like that doesn't matter at all." Grace gave a soft smile. "Real life didn't give me time to care about last names." And then, for the first time in a long time, Lucas Carter spoke about himself. Truly. He told her how he lost his father young, how he inherited the empire burdened with expectations instead of affection, how he grew up being told to be perfect, efficient, untouchable, and how, in the process of becoming what everyone expected, he forgot who he was. Grace listened quietly, like someone carefully picking up the pieces of a broken vase without making a sound. And right there, beneath that tree, as night slowly fell, She said something he would never forget. You don't have to be everything to everyone. You just need to be whole for someone. The breeze turned colder, but neither of them moved. It was as if that bench, simple, worn, forgotten in the back of a luxurious event, had become the most intimate place in the world at that moment. Do you always talk to people like this? Lucas asked, staring at the ground. Like what? Grace replied, curious. Like you're reading beyond what they show. Only when it's worth seeing beyond, she said, looking straight at him. Lucas's gaze locked on hers. For the first time, he didn't feel the need to build an armor out of perfect words. With her, silence was enough. Someone called from inside the hall, the bride smiling and motioning for all the groomsmen and bridesmaids to come take pictures. The quiet moment ended there. Grace stood up slowly, smoothing out her dress. Lucas watched her go, and something inside him moved just as naturally as the scene. Longing. A desire to get closer, not with promises, but with presence. He followed her to the photos. Between flashes, posed smiles, and magazine-worthy grins, their eyes met quietly. And in those silent exchanges, there was more truth than in all the vows that echoed during the ceremony. After the photos, something unexpected happened. Grace went looking for her purse and realized she had left it in a friend's car, a friend who had already left. She had no phone, no money, and her heel was scuffed from running to the ceremony. "It's fine, I'll figure it out," she said, as someone who was used to solving things on her own. But Lucas didn't hesitate. "I'll drive you, please." She looked into his eyes, hesitated, but something in his calmness made her feel safe. Moments later, they were in his car, quiet, comfortable, luxurious. But what impressed Grace wasn't the car. It was the light silence between them, the kind that didn't weigh anything. "You must be used to much more glamorous parties," she said, trying to break the introspective tone of the ride. "And you to much harder days than this," he replied. Grace laughed. "Touché." The ride continued, filled with short stories and long glances, until they arrived at her neighborhood, simple, peaceful, far from the city's postcards. Lucas parked gently and turned off the engine. "Thank you," Grace said, about to open the door. "Wait." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small white envelope. Grace looked at it, confused. "It's not money, relax, it's an invitation." She opened it. It was an invitation to the launch of a social project supported by the Carter Hotel chain, a skills training center for women. "I want you to come, and I want to see you there." "Why?" Lucas took a deep breath. "Because after today I can't pretend you were just a coincidence." Grace held the envelope, eyes starting to fill, and without knowing what to say, she simply smiled. The drive back was quiet. Lucas didn't turn on the radio. The silence seemed more revealing than any song. His eyes were fixed on the road, but his mind was still on that stone bench, on her shy laugh, on that envelope that might end up changing far more than he imagined. He, who controlled empires, was losing control for the first time. And it didn't scare him. For the first time, the unexpected felt like freedom. In the following days, Grace thought many times about throwing the envelope away, not out of pride, but as a way to protect herself. People like him, from the top of the world, and didn't stay. They didn't get involved. They didn't look twice at someone like her. But something in Lucas's eyes, in the way he didn't try to impress her, left doubts in a heart Grace had worked so hard to shield. That Saturday, she arrived early to the event. The community center's event space was decorated with simple flowers, soft lights, and quiet anticipation. She wore a light blue dress, modest but with just enough sparkle for him to recognize her from across the room. And he did. From the other side of the room, Lucas stepped away from a group of investors and walked straight to her, wearing that half smile that didn't ask for permission. It simply arrived. "You came," he said, like someone confessing a secret relief. "You invited me," she replied, eyes shining. "Actually, I think fate sent the invitation. I just delivered it." They laughed, and then came the symbolic gesture. Lucas pulled a small handmade brooch from his pocket, shaped like a lavender flower. I saw this at a local women's artisan stand, thought it looked like you. She accepted the gift like someone receiving something precious, not for the object, but for the intention. Did you know lavender symbolizes calm, healing, and honesty? She asked, looking down at the brooch. Now I do, he replied. And I think it's everything I found the moment I saw you walk in late to that wedding. Grace lowered her eyes, touched, and there in the middle of a social event, between cameras, speeches, and applause, stood two worlds looking at each other without rushing. The world that had everything, and the world that knew how to feel everything. And in that moment, they understood. What begins late can arrive right on time. The days following their reunion at the event weren't quiet. They messaged each other, called at midnight, went on quiet walks. Lucas and Grace were diving into one another with the lightness of people not planning anything, but the depth of those truly being touched for the first time. He took her to simple places where he could just be Lucas and not Carter. Hidden cafes, old bookstores, parks where no one recognized them. And she, without realizing, gave him something priceless, the joy of a life without masks. But the world around them didn't sleep. At a private brunch hosted by his family, Lucas made the mistake of mentioning her casually. His mother raised her eyebrows in mild disapproval. The maid of honor who arrived late? Lucas froze. Her name is Grace. Of course. I just hope she knows how to behave, if you intend to bring her into this world. The sentence echoed in his mind. That same night he went to her apartment. Knocked unannounced, eyes heavy with a conflict he couldn't yet explain. Is everything okay? Grace asked, noticing the serious expression. I just needed to see you. Today was rough. She let him in. Tea on the table, a simple couch, the scent of lavender in the air. The opposite of the world Lucas knew, and precisely for that, the only place where he felt light. He sat in silence. Grace sat beside him, waiting for him to speak. Do you care about what people think? He asked suddenly. She furrowed her brow. Depends. If it's about me, I used to care a lot. Today, it only hurts when it comes from someone I love, Lucas sighed. My mother. She made a comment, and I saw myself becoming that boy again, trying to fit in. And I hate that. Grace didn't reply. She just rested her head on his shoulder. What she said doesn't define me or you, but I understand the fear. I'd have it too if the world were reversed. Lucas turned to her, surprised by her empathy. You always understand everything. So well? It's because life taught me to read between the lines. They looked at each other, and in that moment he realized Grace didn't have to prove she deserved to stand by his side. She had already reached where no one else ever had, the center of his soul. Lucas began inviting her discreetly to more intimate gatherings. Small dinners, meetings with people he trusted. But even in those circles, Grace felt the looks, subtle, polite, but full of judgment. She never complained. She wasn't the type to seek approval. But when a waiter mistook her for staff at one of those dinners, Lucas felt something in him twist with discomfort. You don't have to put up with that, he said once they left. Grace shrugged. I don't endure it for you. I endure it for me, because I know who I am. He admired that about her. But a quiet guilt began to grow inside him. Later that week, she visited his office for the first time. She wanted to personally deliver an invitation to her younger sister's performance at a small neighborhood arts project. Lucas accepted without hesitation, but when she walked into his office, and it felt like stepping into another world. Marble floors, Italian furniture, digital panels. Employees who looked at her like she didn't belong. One detail unsettled her especially, a photo on his shelf of Lucas dancing with a stunning woman at a gala, blonde, sophisticated, the kind who belonged on magazine covers. Grace didn't say anything, but Lucas saw the change in her eyes. That photo, even if old, said a lot. He belonged to another universe. Hours later, he showed up at her sister's event, held in a modest community hall with folding chairs, poor lighting, and amateur sound equipment. But there was something there he hadn't seen in luxury venues. Truth. At the end of the performance, he was the first to stand up and applaud. Grace looked at him as if something deep inside her had been confirmed. Later, as they walked together, she finally spoke. "You know this is going to be hard, right?" He stopped. "What?" "Our path. Your world. Mine." Lucas took her hand. "Difficulty only matters if I don't know what I want. And I do." She smiled. But that smile carried a hint of sadness, because even with all the truth between them, the world would still see them as a mistake. Later that week, Grace received an unexpected envelope, an invitation to a charity gala dinner, signed by Lucas. "Do you really want me to go to that kind of thing?" she asked through a message. "I want you to go because I want you there. Not out of obligation, out of choice." She thought about it for hours, tried to tell herself no. But deep down, she wanted to be by his side. So she went. She wore a borrowed burgundy gown, put together a simple hairstyle, and took a deep breath before walking into the ballroom. The place looked like another planet. Men in tailored tuxedos, women in jewelry that could cover a year's rent. And Grace, her feet nearly faltering, walked in trying to seem steady. But Lucas was waiting for her at the entrance. When he saw her, time slowed. He walked toward her and, ignoring all the stares, offered his arm. "You are the most beautiful woman here, and the strongest too." She accepted the gesture. Throughout the dinner, he introduced her proudly, like someone presenting a precious secret to the world. And slowly, Grace stopped noticing the whispers. She was next to someone who made her feel enough, even in a world that screamed the opposite. Midway through the night, a gossip reporter approached quietly with a loaded question. "Grace, do you feel prepared to be part of the Carter elite?" She didn't hesitate. "I didn't come to fit in, I came to be. And if that's a problem, it's not mine." Lucas held back a laugh. And pride. In the car, on the way home, he held her hand like someone holding something fragile, yet valuable. "What you said tonight made me certain of one thing." "What?" "That no matter where or how, I want to build a place where you feel whole, not squeezed in." Grace looked at him. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the future. In that moment, she understood that love isn't about saving someone. It's about having the courage to stay, even when the world tries to pull you apart, and they were willing to stand together. What began with curiosity and enchantment was becoming something real, and like everything that becomes real, it started to hurt. In the days that followed the gala, Grace began to notice the distance, not from Lucas, but from the world around him. Invitations stopped coming. Community projects she was involved in were mysteriously re-evaluated, and on social media, a well-known influencer posted, "Behind all that glitter, there's always a shadow trying to rise." No names were mentioned, but the message was clear. Grace didn't mention it to Lucas. She didn't want to bring him more weight. But what she didn't say, her eyes revealed. That night he came to her place for a quiet dinner. Just the two of them. No cameras. No masks. She entered the car with a tired smile. "You seem distant," he said as he drove through the city lights. "Just realistic." He glanced at her, confused. "What happened?" She took a deep breath. "Lucas, I wasn't born for this world, and the closer I get to it, the more I feel like an intruder." "Don't say that, you're more genuine than all of them put together," she smiled, eyes glassy. "But that doesn't change the fact that I feel like the mistake people are waiting for you to make. And someday, you might get tired of explaining me." Silence. He pulled the car over near an overlook with a view of the city. The sky was clear, but inside, both of them were covered in heavy clouds. "Grace, you're not a mistake. You're the only right thing in my life." She turned to face him. "Then why does it feel like the whole world is trying to erase me from your story?" He couldn't answer, because no matter how hard he fought for her, his world was built to reject anything that didn't follow its script, and Grayson didn't want to be the exception. She wanted to be the choice. The following week, Lucas traveled to Europe for work. 4 days, Just 4 days. But for Grace, it felt like 4 months in slow motion. The messages became fewer, the replies got shorter, and then came the silence. Across the ocean, Lucas was buried in commitments, family pressures, and a storm of business decisions. But it wasn't his schedule that was pulling him away from Grace. It was fear, the fear of not being able to protect her in this cruel world, the fear of being the reason she'd start to dim, and worst of all, the fear that she would realize she deserved more than living in the shadow of a last name that hurt her. When he returned, he didn't go straight to see her. Grace, out of pride, didn't reach out either, until one rainy evening, walking home from work, her sister's borrowed car had broken down. She saw something on the ground, a soaked notebook left behind by someone. When she opened it, she instantly recognized the doodles. It belonged to one of her shyest students, a little girl from the community project where she volunteered. When she reached the small building where the project operated, she found the door locked. A note was taped to it, temporary closure due to cuts in institutional funding. She froze. That project had been partially funded by one of the foundations linked to Lucas's company. She didn't want to believe it. But the writing was clear. Something had changed since she got close to him. And now, the consequences were hitting where it hurt most, the children, the art, the hope. That night, Grace wrote a letter, not out of anger, but out of sadness. She went to his apartment building, a glass tower that felt like it didn't belong to any heart, and left the envelope at the front desk. Inside, she had written, "You taught me to believe I could occupy spaces I never imagined. But now all I feel is that I'm taking up the space that's always been reserved for another kind of woman. I don't want to be a beautiful memory that turned into a wound, and I don't want you to be the man who tried, but didn't. Stay with care, Grace." Lucas read the letter the following morning. He was alone in his home office, surrounded by silence and paperwork. Grace's handwriting was soft, but the weight of her words crushed him. He didn't cry. He didn't know how, but he felt shattered on the inside. That morning, he cancelled meetings, ignored calls, and went straight to the building where the community project had been suspended. He spoke with the coordinators, found out the funding cut had been suggested by a board member concerned about the foundation's reputation. Given Mr. Carter's personal entanglements, Lucas didn't think twice. He reversed the decision, personally signed off on the funding reinstatement, and added a clause: the project would have autonomy and institutional protection, no further risk of suspension. But this wasn't about saving Grace. It was about finally standing for something. For real. That afternoon, he went to her house. He knocked on the door with his heart in his hands and his pride at his feet. Grace opened it. Her eyes were tired but still soft, like they'd been waiting for what he had to say, even if they didn't believe he'd say it. Lucas took a deep breath. "I heard what happened with the project. It's taken care of." She nodded but said nothing. "And I read your letter." Grace lowered her eyes. "I didn't write it to blame you. I wrote it to free myself." He stepped closer. "You're not taking anyone's place. You are the place where I can finally breathe." She looked at him, emotional. "Are you sure, Lucas? Because loving someone like me means going against everything they expect of you." He smiled. "Thank God for that." Then he pulled a small keychain from his pocket, Day-star-shaped pendant. "You gave me the sky back when my life was just a glass ceiling." Grace held the keychain, her hands trembling, and right there, on that simple porch, with no photographers, no luxury, no audience, they embraced like two people who knew that real love doesn't need permission, and if the world was too big for them to fit in it together, then they'd build a universe of their own. Months had passed since the day Grace opened the door for Lucas, and for a new beginning. But something had changed. They weren't just in love. They were committed, truly, through daily life, through differences, through flaws and efforts. Lucas no longer lived between parties and meetings. He started his mornings with simple good morning texts and ended his nights with dinners on the couch, watching old movies Grace loved, and that he pretended not to fall asleep during. Grace, in turn, opened up emotional spaces she had long kept closed. She let herself be cared for, accepted that being strong didn't mean facing everything alone, but the world still tried to test them. One day, after attending a private event where Lucas had brought Grace as his official girlfriend, for the first time a paparazzo shouted, "Lucas, is this about humanizing your brand or is it real love?" He tightened his grip on her hand. Grace pretended not to hear, but she felt it, and Lucas felt it for her. That night, he was quiet. So was she. Until in the middle of the bedroom, lights off and the world falling apart outside, he said, "I'm so tired, Grace." She sat up in bed, worried. "Of me? No. Of pretending life has to swallow me for me to be someone." She looked at him, confused. He got up, walked to the closet and pulled out an old box. From it, he took an envelope, the letter she had written months ago. "I read this dozens of times, and each time it hurt more because I knew it was true. I was trying to fit into a world I didn't choose. But now..." He knelt on the floor, not like a cliché proposal, but as an act of surrender. "Now I choose you, life with you, your places, your dreams, your name." Grace came closer, tears brimming. He pulled a folded document from his pocket. It was an expansion plan for the community project she worked in, with funding, autonomy, and a new headquarters under her name. "You gave me a home within myself. I'm just giving that back to the world through you." She hugged him in silence, with the kind of emotion that has no words. The news spread like wildfire. Lucas Carter, the reserved magnate, had personally funded a cultural center in the name of an unknown woman. And that wasn't all. He had stepped down from 2 family board positions and refused to endorse major ad campaigns, choosing privacy and values over appearances. The press speculated. Social media exploded. But for him, only one thing mattered. For the first time, he was living by choice, not obligation. Grace, on the other hand, faced the opposite. Now she was visible, but not by those who truly saw her. Some tried to use her as a symbol, others as a stepping stone. She had to learn to protect herself without losing her essence, and Lucas became her anchor. Not the man who shielded her from the world, but the one who walked beside her, even when she wanted to run. One afternoon, while organizing materials for the new center, she found a box of old photos. Among them, one faded picture stood out. A little red-haired girl holding a childlike drawing with a phrase written in shaky handwriting. "I want to help people. Feel seen," Grace froze. It was her at 7 years old. Lucas came closer, looking over her shoulder with care. "You knew who you were long before the world tried to tell you otherwise." She smiled, eyes misty. "And you? Who were you before all of this?" He thought for a second. "A lonely boy trying to be a castle. Now I just want to be a bridge." She hugged him tightly. There they were, 2 people who didn't complete each other because they were already whole, but who added to one another in the most genuine way. They were about to change the lives of many, but first, they had changed themselves. Months later, at the official opening of the cultural center, the hall was full. But there was no luxury. There was sunlight pouring through large windows, children running around with colored pencils, teens rehearsing, a play in the back, and the smiles of people who knew something new was beginning. Lucas stood beside her. No cameras, no rehearsed speech. Just presence. Grace moved, held a small envelope he had slipped into her bag that morning. She waited for the right moment to open it. And there, sitting on the wooden steps of the center's patio, as the golden sky of late afternoon painted, the same light from the day it all began, she read, "Grace, you arrived late to that wedding, but right on time for my life. While everyone was watching the altar, I saw you. And since then, everything I try to do, every gesture, every choice, every sacrifice, is a way of saying that what begins unexpectedly can be what saves us. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that by your side it finally has meaning. With love, Lucas." She closed the envelope, eyes full of tears. She didn't need a ring. She didn't need impossible promises. That letter was the gesture. The creation of that center was the vow. The freedom to be who they were was the love. Lucas walked over and sat beside her. You read it." She simply rested her head on his shoulder and replied, "Yes, and I saw you too. Before I knew your name, before I knew your world, I saw who you were. And since then, I haven't been able to unsee it." They sat in silence, watching the sunset reflected in the smiles of the children, the maid of honor who arrived late, and the magnate who only wanted silence, had found in each other the only thing time cannot erase, a love that arrived off script, but in the heart it was meant for.